Sound, music, sustainability. Welcome to Sustain FM. Most of the time, we think of humans and non-humans as separate things. We experience and live in different worlds. Humans may love nature but are separate from nature. But what if that's a wrong, or at least a limiting way to think about it? What would it mean to break down that separation? How might that change our experiences of sound and life with non-humans and nature? I'm your host, Steve Williams, and today we explore these questions with Gina Lo. We have lots to talk about, so be sure to check out the show notes for links to the sounds and get in touch to info@drewsnoise.com with your comments and questions. Gina is a Taiwanese-born sound artist, field recordist, and performer based in Berlin. Their work revolves around the creation of immersive sonic environments that explore the fluid boundaries between human and non-human experiences, harmoniously merging the organic with the synthetic. Through live performances and sound installations, Gina employs a blend of electroacoustic instrumentation, field recordings, and custom-designed synthesizers. With a strong emphasis on attentive listening, their improvisational sets transform spaces into an ever-evolving atmospheric landscapes. So welcome, Gina, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Yeah, very excited about this conversation. So I have like a million questions, but before we dive into some of the pieces about your sounds, I'm curious to learn more about how you think about the different media forms you work with. And actually, just before we started recording, you mentioned rehearsals for a dance piece. So you've produced and released tracks, you perform live, you've composed scores, you develop spatial and interactive audio installations, and you work with live performance and movement artists. And I'm really curious how much of that you see as, is it kind of like all the same thing, and those are just sort of different manifestations of how you approach things? Or do you kind of see those as actually kind of different disciplines or formats or genres? I'm curious how you approach that.
So I think they're all a little bit connected with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I would say improvisation is a big anchor in my work, and a lot of my work lays in research and bonding with my instruments and the sonic materials I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, I like to start with one sound and see where it leads me. And this will look like it will start with like a base foundation where
Mm-hmm.
on top of which I can build things from to go to places.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to then take what I've come up with from the research and create some form of structure around it. So for performance, usually I have an idea all the places I want to go to, and I might write them down depending on if I'm working with other people. This could be another sound artist or a dancer. And the rest I improvise.
Okay.
So if I'm working with somebody else and it requires structures, so we understand the common space we're going to. And this, for example, is really important when you work with dancers. But other than that, I am most of the time just improvising.
Okay, interesting. And does that improvisational style, when you talked about starting with one sound or a base or a foundation, I'm curious how that fits with improvisation. You mentioned about collaborating with dancers where there needs to be a structure, but I'm thinking about how that might fit with the scores, because you've also done scores for film, where that's a little bit different, where the director may want, I don't know, a certain emotional tone for a scene, or there's certain time bits that you need to hit. Do you kind of mix that structure with the improvisation?
I think with scores specifically, and also I think it's quite similar with sound installation. Everything needs to be composed, and like conscious decisions has to be made. And I also spend like probably unhealthy amount of time examining like amplified sounds in production that nobody else will probably pay attention to.
Right.
But that's just ambient music to me
Hmm.
also. But yeah, it has a lot to do with because this is customer service. It's
Mm,
not about me.
mm,
And yeah, that in that sense, it's not improvised at all. Most of the time, I really compose.
mm,
So that is something that's I guess, yeah, you can say it's different than the rest of the work I do. But when it comes to a live performance score, there's still a lot of the presence of improvisation in it.
mm. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting, interesting. Um, okay, yeah, so I think, yes, you're one of these tough people to talk to because every time you say something, I have like a million things and directions that I want to go. So I'll try and focus myself a little bit. Um, but maybe coming back to one thing you mentioned in just a couple of minutes ago, and your bio also mentions this idea of sonic research. And
Mhm.
I'm really curious what that means to you, because I could interpret that as researching into your own sound. You mentioned thinking about amplified sound, or it could be
Mhm.
using sound to explore other ideas, or both, or maybe something different. So I'm curious, what does sonic research mean for you in your work?
So to begin
Mm-hmm.
with, I'm a very well. I also came to a realization that I'm a very sound sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned to appreciate it in a way that make my life easier because it's always present. We can't escape it, and the only thing we can control is for me, to change my relationship with it,
Mm-hmm.
to change my perspective. So I emphasize a lot on deep listening as a primary method to guide my projects.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a very immersive, perceptive experience that helps me connect with the idea of or rather the perception of the interconnectedness between environments, humans, and non-human.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this is not just about sound as an audioble phenomenon, let's say, but it's a way for me to engage and understand the world.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it's just so I'm a field recordist, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think deep listening and field recording, they really go hand in hand. And this, for instance, is something that demands my full attention. And how many things like in modern world actually can like successfully demand our full attention? I think it's
Mm-hmm.
quite rare for my personal experience to have my entire being devoted to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's wonderful that it has this ability to really draw me in so fully and really demand me to be present. And I research a lot from this state of mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, and so a lot of it is very intuitive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also one of the things that really contributed a lot in my improvisation projects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they kind of just, I think it's the perfect marriage really to
Mm-hmm.
each other.
Right.
And um, a lot of my projects are combined with both organic, whether it's field recording sounds or just me fidgeting about anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And um, I think by capturing these sound, and working with these sound, I give voice to non-human
Mm-hmm.
um, in the way that I amplify or just bring attention to their presence in a world that's more dominated by human noise.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I value and I'm just very obsessed with
Mm-hmm.
in my work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. It's actually a perfect lead into the next thing I wanted to ask you about is I like that idea of sort of bringing or paying attention and bringing attention and sort of making audible some of those sounds or those non-human voices that we might not be hearing. But the other thing that I find interesting about your approach, and I'm actually just going to repeat a phrase from your bio here that said you create immersive sonic environments that explore the fluid boundaries between human and non-human experiences, harmoniously merging the organic with the synthetic. And you mentioned a couple minutes ago there about the sounds of the non-human. One of the things I'm interested in, I play a lot with my research and work, is that idea of the boundaries. What is and which are kind of mentioned in the intro of, certainly in sort of Western modernist enlightenist thought, there is a very specific boundary. Humans over here, nature over here. And that's something that a lot of artists and scholars and a lot of other people have challenged, and a lot of indigenous cultures have known for thousands of years. And we in the Western world are kind of coming late to those, to sort of rediscovering those ideas. But I'm curious why. So you talked a little bit about how you do that, but I'm curious a little before we get more deep into that. I'm curious about the why. The why is that important for you to surface those sounds, or why do those fluid boundaries matter to you?
I think it really, for me, I was really exploring this question
Hmm.
from an ontological perspective.
Hmm.
How do we define being or existence when life forms and environments are always interacting and interrelating?
Hmm.
And I think sound is, of all mediums, is really powerful to explore this, because it really allows you to dissolve the boundaries
Hmm.
between the self and the environment. Because by focusing on sound, I'm acknowledging that the way I experience and perceive life is relational.
Hmm.
And in this context, both the human, so me, and the non-human aren't isolated categories, but we're all part of a bigger, larger system of being, of this web of life.
Hmm.
And the quality of sound really mirrors this way life is connected. And I also feel like, in a way, by blending, I think it started off as I just let my intuition and desire guide me where I want, and then later on I contextualize why I'm so obsessed with doing these things. And it's not just for the sake of aesthetic,
Hmm.
but for me, I feel like I'm also drawing attention to how our interactions with technology and this industrial processes influence the natural world.
Hmm.
And because it's as if, like, we are part of nature and technology is just an extension of our creation, is part
Hmm.
of evolution.
Hmm.
And I would like to, I guess, challenge the traditional thinking of those two things are rather very connected to each other than approaching them in separate matters.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's and maybe that's actually a good connection to moving a little bit more concretely into some of the sound pieces. So I recently saw you perform the piece "Erosion" that you composed with Felipe Vareschi, that's on the latest Renatura compilation. And there's a lot that I wanted to ask you about, but maybe first, can you give us a bit of background to the piece? Because from what I heard and what I know of it, I think it kind of connects to some of the things that you were just talking about there.
So we were invited to create this piece,
Hmm.
and We could pretty much draw inspiration from anything that lives between the earth and the sky. And we find ourselves just really fascinated and inspired by this immense power of geological time and how the Earth's surface is gradually shaped by the power of different forms of weathering and erosion. But this happened over like centuries, right? So we try to capture this process sonically to imagine how the landscape evolves over centuries and from a starting point of a rough, uneven terrain to something smooth and polished. And so the piece is about translating the very slow, gradual transformation into sound and making it somewhat perceptible or tangible. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you're a field recordist, and in addition to the erosion track that we just we heard, you've also had a couple of soundscape field recordings on the new Harkening Critters compilation. By the way, Harkening Critters, I love that. That's a
Yeah,
great
me
name
too.
for an album.
It really
The two,
is.
Kawi Bay and Bornean Anura. I'm curious, what was the inspiration for those locations, those sounds, those recordings? Was that did you sort of have free reign to kind of choose anything you want, or was there sort of a theme that was guiding the choice of those locations?
So a little bit about my background.
Hmm.
I was raised in different countries, but um, I'm originally from Taiwan. So
Hmm.
I was raised on a tropical island, and I used to live off grid in between East and Southeast Asia on and off for about 3 to 4 years in my mid 20s.
Hmm.
And those were really special period of my life. Those were the years when I felt the most connected with my primal instinct and just the most introspective of the self as a
Hmm.
human. And so after I got into sound and field recording in my late 20s, it was only natural just to bring these practice back to the natural environments
Hmm.
where I used to live, but also extending to places I have never been to. And I was primarily interested in visiting places that are untouched
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
unorganized by humans. And I really wanted to just be a witness and document this incredible planet we inhabit on, and to bring them to places that are otherwise disconnected from it all, which is most of the time in big cities. I live in a
Hmm.
big city. And most of these trips are self-funded.
Hmm.
And so one of the main long-term project that I want to realize now is sound ecology projects, in which I want to really just go hunting for primary rainforest and
Hmm.
jungle. And I am specifically interested, but not limited to environments that are facing deforestation and illegal poaching crisis.
Hmm.
So which is why I ended up going to Borneo last year. I spent about 3 weeks there,
Hmm.
and that was my first proper field recording trip in Southeast Asia. I spent maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks out of this 3 weeks in just nature, doing field recordings and just chasing and obsessing over animals. So those two recordings were from this trip.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm essentially, if you if you know me, I'm essentially a beach monkey cosplaying a big city person. So I'm just going back to the jungle with my field recording
Right, right, right.
equipment. Yeah, and then bring these sounds back into the big city.
Hmm.
Yeah.
something else I'm curious about. I'm just looking at the time here. Okay, let me go back to that one. So I'm curious, kind of almost circling back a little. You talked about this a little bit earlier when you were talking about the erosion of sort of having the composition that was released on physically or digitally or whatever, and then sort of having the score and kind of bring that into live performance. And I'm curious how you're thinking about that kind of in the context of these field recordings. When you're going to these locations, are you thinking about that field recording project with kind of the output of, for example, those pieces that were on the compilation, and or maybe or together? Are you also thinking about, do you then use those and bring those into future live performances or compositions, or I'm just kind of curious whether those are sort of, I guess what I'm trying to get at, whether is a live performance kind of an extension of what you're recording, or a new thing, or are those distinct things or just different versions of the same thing, almost as you talked about at the beginning with dance or composition or score or live performance being, if I heard you right, you were saying they're all kind of related for you.
So I wasn't necessarily thinking about, I guess these things come naturally, but I wasn't necessarily thinking about the releases, but I definitely knew I wanted to, because so I did this sound installation in 2021, I believe, when I was in school, and it was an octophonic installation in this studio where I composed a 17-minute long piece and specialized in this room. And a big anchor or foundation in this piece was just sounds of different natural environments. And that was really just the bed I built the piece on, and I layered modular sounds on top of it that was really kind of mimicking creaturey animal sounds. And I wrote a little something with my friend Paris, and we did some spoken words, and that was, I think, also that was my first ever sound installation. And I think that really kind of was the beginning of me working with field recording and modular synths.
Okay.
And so for how can I organize this? So I think it's just like for me, this love for natural environment and me wanting to document them is the main driving force of me wanting to visit these places, to be part of these environments, and just to experience the power of being in these places and just really immerse myself in these experiences. And usually it takes me a while to really wrap my head around, first just to like come down from these experiences, these trips. And I spent like about maybe almost a year or more listening back to these recordings and organizing them and understanding what I can work with and what not. So I started, before I even thought about releasing them, I started working with them in my performances. And what I really enjoy doing is to start a piece, a live performance, with an environment that I recorded in Borneo, but also it could be from Taiwan. Last year I was in Taiwan and Borneo. And so I like to start with a piece of natural field recording, and then I slowly merge this into the modular. And for me to like combine those two, like the synthetics and the organic sound, I kind of just want to, I don't know if you can say celebrate or just to recognize that they are both just expressions of life's creation.
Right.
And they can be merged together like so beautifully. And this is the main theme that I have been working with in my live improv performances since a few years now. And my aim is just to create this environment to invite people to practice deep listening and to encourage them to be and to come into this state of mind of personal exploration or introspection within this larger web of life.
It's something that I'm curious about, and I ask almost everyone I interview is about how some of those concepts and ideas and themes behind your compositions and performances get translated and communicated to audiences. Because one end of the spectrum is making everything super, super obvious. And then the risk is then it kind of feels like a lecture or a public service announcement of like, pay attention to nature. And then the other end of the spectrum is it so esoteric and conceptual that the audience has no idea what's going on. And I'm curious how you navigate that spectrum, or how important is it for you that the audience understands your intentions compared to being immersed in the aesthetic experience? Is more about, or maybe given what you're just saying, is it the attunement, the deep listening? Is that kind of what you're going? I'm just curious how you think about that.
Mm. Mm. I think there are two aspects to answer this question. So it's not actually super important for me. For the audience to understand, I actually quite prefer them to not focus on trying to understand, but to just let the sound guide them and take them under.
Right.
Because I really focus on, well, I work a lot on creating a space to get to where I intended to bring them or make them experience. And I much rather to have people kind of just sit back and let the sound do the job. But also one of my main goal in general is to just, because when I first started performing, I played at few sleep concerts, and I really enjoyed playing to people that are in this state of neither asleep or awake. And that's when your subconscious is really guiding your consciousness.
Right.
And it's a really interesting headspace to be in. And so my intention is to kind of trigger or inspire people to be in this state of mind, to hypnotize them. So I also listen back to my own rehearsals or research and kind of check back in with myself, how I feel when I listen to my own recordings. And yeah, I often notice, so I feel like maybe for you it's similar when you're doing live performance, that especially doing modular live performance, I find it a very isolating experience in a way, because you have to be so hyper focused on what you're doing, which leaves you very little room to observe how people were receiving it. And I can only observe like within 2 meters of, or 1 meter of what's happening around me. And sometimes I notice people drawing, like scribbling or writing, or they're just resting their eyes. And that's that's my goal. Like I want people to indulge in the sound and within themselves. And so, yeah, it's for me not super important for them to understand. I rather want them to feel the sound.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, yeah, thanks so much for chatting. And as usual, we close the show with a recording of a live performance. And I think you've shared an excerpt from one of your performances at Berlin Modular Society. Can you set up for the audience what we're going to hear? What was your kind of intention behind this piece?
So like what I mentioned before, I'm really interested in merging the organic and synthetic sounds. And in this piece, so it's an excerpt from a bit of the first part to the end part, but it's more like the middle of it. And I believe the piece was kind of like transitioning into just synthetic sound. And I started with this samples of me just fidgeting around with rocks. With like, I like to go to nature and collect rocks. So I have a bunch of rocks at home. So I was just playing with them and I recorded that. And so I was just processing them in my granular sampler. And from there, I took it to this combination of that and this synthetic birdie sound that I was making. Yeah, and then it takes you into this quite intense just space of deep drone. And then the piece went to a more landed and wow, I think it was just another tone of drone playing underneath. And then you will hear me reciting the number, you will hear me reciting passage number 15 in Tao Te Ching is Chinese classic text that's written by Lao Tzu. And it's like a foundational work of Taoism. And it's central to both philosophical and religious Taoism, and it has been really influential to Chinese philosophy and religious practice in general. And I have been obsessed with Buddhism and Taoism since my mid-20s. So I've been reading them and just because these are written in ancient traditional Chinese. And even I don't understand, like when I read them, I really need to go search for the explanation of these texts. And the translation of Tao Te Ching, the literal meaning is the classic of the way and virtue. And so what I recently started doing is I brought out my voice in my live sets again after 2 years. I used to work with hydrophones and vocals, but I literally just put the hydrophones in my mouth and I started humming, which really, it was fun, but it limits the way you can work with your voice. And so I brought out the mic again, and I've really saved like a lot of the passages that I resonated with deeply recently. And the passage number 15 has been the one that I include in my performances a lot lately. So you will hear me reciting the original text plus the English translation, just so people can relate a bit to what I'm speaking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, looking forward to listening to hearing that and sharing that with our audience. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Gina. I really enjoyed that chat.
Thank you so much. Me too.
You're welcome. So, yeah, thank you, everyone. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sounds that we heard and for more info on Gina's work. Please get in touch with info@drewsnoise.com with your comments, questions, ideas for future shows, or anything else that's on your mind about sound, music, and sustainability. And now let's listen to Gina's performance.
深不可视。夫为不可视，故强为之柔。欲兮若东涉川，游兮若为斯，言兮其若客，涣兮其若临事，敦兮其若亢兮其若鼓，昏兮其若浊，孰能尽一之许谦？孰能逐一尽之许生？保此道者，不欲盈。夫为不盈，故能避而心诚。Once upon a time, people who knew the way were subtle, spiritual, mysterious, penetrating, unfathomable, since they're inexplicable. I can only say what they seem like. Cautious, yes, as if wading through a winter river. Alert.
Okay, thanks for listening to Sustain. Hope to catch you again next time. Be sure to sign up for our email list on our website, sustain.fm. Follow our Instagram, also sustain.fm, to get more info on the radio show, in-person events in different cities, live streams, and more. All right, until next time, see you on the dance floor.